The ancient town of Colchester, recognized as the original capital of Roman Britain, holds a unique position in the archaeological and historical understanding of the Romano-British world. While monumental architecture, military installations, and urban planning have long dominated scholarly focus, recent attention has turned toward more intimate traces of life and death, most notably, cremation burials. Traditionally overshadowed by inhumation practices, cremations in Colchester offer an overlooked yet profoundly informative lens into the beliefs, customs, and social structures of its ancient inhabitants. Far from being merely a method of body disposal, cremation in Roman Britain, and particularly in Colchester, was a complex ritual imbued with symbolism, personal identity, and evolving cultural dynamics. The process of burning the body, collecting the remains, and placing them within urns or other containers reflects both practical considerations and deeply rooted spiritual and communal beliefs. These practices often bridged local Iron Age traditions with Roman funerary customs, embodying a unique Romano-British synthesis. By reframing the significance of human cremations in Colchester, we move beyond their archaeological categorization and begin to understand them as rich cultural texts. These cremations serve not only as evidence of individual lives but also as reflections of broader societal trends, including Romanization, identity negotiation, and expressions of status and memory. In this way, cremations become essential to reconstructing how people lived, died, and remembered in one of Britain's most important ancient settlements. This study aims to reposition cremation burials at the heart of interpretative frameworks concerning Roman Colchester. Through examining their physical remnants, associated grave goods, spatial distribution, and ceremonial contexts, we can gain deeper insight into the community's values, relationships, and transformations. Ultimately, these fiery farewells to the dead offer us one of the most human perspectives on ancient Colchester, an enduring narrative etched in ash and urn.
Hi, my name's Morwen. I'm here to talk to you about my project, which is called All That Remains, and it uses human cremated bone from Roman Colchester to better understand what life was like during the Roman occupation. My background is actually in museum work, museum heritage. I've done a lot of work in the northeast of England at Roman forts that are connected to Hadrian's Wall. So it's a really exciting opportunity for me to be looking at a much earlier period. The Roman occupation doesn't reach the northeast until a good few decades after they've come to the south. So prior to starting to do this, my knowledge was very much focused on a specific military situation in the north of England. One of the things that really interested me about this project in particular is that it does combine all of these different aspects. So I'm very lucky to be working with the Colchester Castle Museum and looking at a collection that is now under their care. It's given me a really good opportunity to not only develop my bioarchaeological skills, so my studying of human bone, but also to develop my museum outreach skills as well. There's a lot that can be done with the project, which I'm looking forward to, in terms of public engagement and outreach. So for the people of Colchester and the area especially, this is very much their history. You know, it's all being excavated from streets that they walk on a regular basis, and it would be really, really great to actually be able to bring information about the people that used to be in Colchester to the people that are there now. I've also got a lot of experience with education work, so in museums and in schools as well. So I think my combined background of heritage work and educational work is something that can really benefit this project, and this project can benefit me. I'm hoping eventually to go back into the museum industry once I've finished my PhD and take the skills that I've learned into that environment again. I'd like to develop educational resources to do with Romans, but also because I am a bioarchaeologist, and I have an MSc in human osteoarchaeology from the University of Reading, where we are now. I'm really looking forward to ways that I can try and get that information and how we study cremated remains, and really the value of using the people from the past in modern studies, putting this into educational work, so it's something that hopefully will inspire more people to move into bioarchaeology and looking at cremations, because we do need to develop it as a field. So firstly, why is Colchester such an important place? Why am I looking at this area specifically? We know that before the Romans came along, it was a really important area in the Iron Age, so it's linked to tribes like the Trinovantes and the Catavaloni, and it was quite an influential area for them. When the Romans invade in AD 43, they establish a fortress in Colchester, and then by AD 49 it's become a veteran colony. So it's a place where soldiers can go to retire, and there's also a large civilian population as well. It's got a really interesting history. There's a lot of archaeological work that's been done there already, and it is an area where we can really see a lot of detail about what's happened. So we know that in AD 60 it's attacked by Boudica as part of her rebellion and completely destroyed, and then it's rebuilt afterwards because it was considered important enough by the Roman people. Even though the focus does move away to London and that becomes the new capital city, people do still stay in Colchester, and it remains an influential place for the 400 years of the Roman occupation here. So because it's the first place that the Romans settled, it's seen as a bit of a reflection of what's happening in the empire on the whole.
Cremation is often perceived as a conclusion, a ritual of closure, a final rite of passage. Yet in the context of ancient Colchester, the original Romano-British capital, cremated human remains do more than mark the end of life. They offer vital clues to how people lived, remembered, and related to the world around them. This project seeks to reframe cremation not simply as a funerary practice, but as a dynamic cultural process that can illuminate key aspects of life in Roman Britain's earliest and most symbolically loaded urban centre. Colchester, Camulodunum, was a site of immense political, military, and symbolic significance during the Roman occupation. As the first Roman colonia in Britain and the seat of imperial power during the early years of conquest, the town became a nexus where native British traditions intersected with Roman customs. This cultural entanglement is particularly visible in the funerary sphere. Cremation was a predominant form of burial in early Roman Britain, and Colchester boasts one of the richest assemblages of cremation burials in the province. Yet, despite their abundance, these remains have often been treated as routine or secondary in interpretive narratives, overshadowed by grander architectural remains or inhumation graves of later periods. By re-evaluating cremation evidence, this study places renewed emphasis on what these burials can tell us, not only about death, but about social identity, family structures, ritual practice, and the shifting values of a hybridizing community. Cremation rituals involved complex sequences of actions, the selection of pyre sites, the gathering of remains, the choice of containers and accompanying grave goods, and the spatial positioning of burials. Each stage was loaded with meaning and served to communicate the deceased's identity, social role, and the community's relationship to both tradition and innovation. Importantly, cremation does not obliterate the body's story, rather, it transforms it. Burnt bone analysis can still reveal age, sex, health, and trauma, while the associated artifacts, such as pottery, personal adornments, or imported goods, open windows into networks of trade, belief systems, and status performance. Patterns in burial locations around Colchester also point to evolving urban landscapes and changing relationships between the living and the dead, reflecting broader shifts in cultural and political life. This project contends that cremation practices in Colchester represent more than a method of disposal, they are cultural dialogues, performed by the living to make sense of loss, memory, and identity in a changing world. By foregrounding cremation, we gain a more textured and inclusive picture of Roman Britain, one that prioritizes everyday lives and personal histories over imperial narratives alone. Ultimately, the cremated dead of Colchester are not silent. They speak, through ash, artifact, and ritual, and by listening more closely, we can understand not only how this early Romano-British community died, but how they lived, adapted, and remembered it across generations. This reframing invites us to see death not as an end, but as a vital archive of life.
So moving forward a bit, the cremations that I look at in particular come from a different time period of Colchester's history. Even though they're Roman, they're very connected to the antiquarian excavations of the 1800s. So we've got people like George Jocelyn, John Taylor and A.M. Jarman who do a lot of excavation work, particularly on their own land. They're kind of landowners in the area, and they put together these private collections that then eventually go into Colchester Museum. Now, a lot of these excavations were also overseen by a man called William Wire, who was from Colchester as well, and he's one of the reasons that we have a lot of the drawings and the maps that we do of the Victorian excavations that happened. So even though these cremations have been excavated for a long time, there's not a lot of information known about the bone themselves. Traditionally, the focus was on the urns, the grave goods, and the kind of treasures that people were particularly interested in. The bone itself is relatively overlooked, and this is a problem that we see throughout archaeology and throughout bioarchaeology as well. So, archaeologically speaking, people tended to go after what they saw as more precious and more interesting. There was this idea that you couldn't really tell as much from cremated bone as you could from something like a full skeleton, which means that the cremated bone then wasn't looked at in very much detail, if at all. It was very secondary to the rest of the burials. The issue that we have there is that in the 1st and 2nd century, the Romans are mostly cremating their dead, so it's the main funerary rite. That means that we then have a huge gap in knowledge of a good couple of hundred years where we don't know as much about the people of the Roman Empire and of Roman Britain as we do in the 3rd and 4th century when skeletons have been examined. So the aim of my project is to try and address that kind of lack in information that we have by doing an osteological analysis of the cremated human bone itself. It's a fairly new topic in bioarchaeology. It has been studied for the past few decades, but not in as much detail as full skeletons from inhumation burials. So it's really a very developing field still in many ways. So my project takes a holistic approach to this. I'll be combining osteological data to do with biological sex, age at death, pathology, so looking at illnesses that people would have lived with and any injuries that they got, any trauma that they suffered while they were alive. I'll then be combining those aspects with things to do with the burials themselves, so burial location, the type of urn that people had, any grave goods and pyre goods that they might have had with them, to try and recreate the identities of these people. So there's lots that could be discovered at the moment. We know that they were soldiers there, so we would expect to see male cremation burials and cultural items connected to the military. But we know that this is a really diverse time, and we know that there would have been lots of other people there as well. So one of the things I'm quite interested in looking at is how women and children connected to the army might be represented through their burials.
Building upon this reframing, it becomes essential to recognize cremation as a lived experience, one that involved multiple participants, layered meanings, and a community's collective response to mortality. The act of cremating a body was more than a technical task. It was a performance of remembrance, identity construction, and emotional expression. Through the material residues of these rituals, we gain insight into the values, anxieties, and beliefs of Romano-British society during a time of significant cultural transition. In Colchester, cremation sites were not isolated from the rhythms of daily life. They were integrated into the landscape in ways that suggest ongoing relationships between the living and the dead. Roads, property boundaries, and even domestic areas sometimes ran alongside or near burial grounds, creating an environment where memory and presence coexisted. This spatial intimacy reinforces the idea that the cremated dead continued to shape community identity long after the flames had gone out. Moreover, the variation in cremation practices, from the types of pyres constructed to the diversity of grave goods, hints at social differentiation, regional influences, and evolving rituals over time. These nuances challenge any singular interpretation, and instead support a more pluralistic understanding of death in Roman Britain. They also underscore the importance of approaching cremation not as a fixed tradition, but as a flexible and adaptive cultural expression. By integrating archaeological science with cultural interpretation, we can reconstruct not only the physical processes of cremation but also the symbolic landscapes in which they were embedded. In doing so, Colchester emerges not just as a Roman administrative centre but as a place where identity, memory, and belonging were continually negotiated through acts of fire and farewell. As we sift through these ashes, we uncover not silence but stories, intimate, fragmented, and profound, that deepen our understanding of the human past.
What I'm really trying to do is recreate personal histories of the people from Roman Colchester itself. And it gives us a really unique opportunity to try and fully understand what the relationship would have been like between the local population and an incoming population throughout the Roman conquest. We see a lot of migration in and out of Colchester over the 400 years that it's in use as a Romano-British town. So this project in particular presents a really, really good opportunity to be able to kind of dive into these relationships and these changing and mixing of cultures to start to see how people under the occupation of Rome and at this invasion period really kind of interact with each other. And we see a new, possibly developing culture come out of it.
Human cremations in ancient Colchester are far more than remnants of the dead. They are echoes of lives once lived, complex expressions of identity, belief, and belonging in a rapidly transforming society. By reframing cremation as central rather than peripheral to our understanding of Roman Britain's first capital, we gain access to a deeper, more intimate portrait of the people who inhabited this vital settlement. These acts of burning, collecting, and burying were not merely mechanical rites, but deeply symbolic performances that bridged the divide between the living and the dead, the local and the imperial, the personal and the communal. Colchester's cremation burials illuminate the ways individuals and communities navigated cultural convergence. They embody both continuity and change, retaining elements of Iron Age tradition while absorbing and adapting Roman customs. Through these practices, people expressed their identities, preserved memory, and negotiated their place in a new socio-political order. The artifacts, spatial arrangements, and bioarchaeological data tied to these cremations offer insights not only into death rituals but also into family life, social status, mobility, health, and cultural integration. By centering cremation in the study of ancient Colchester, we shift the interpretive lens toward the lived experiences of ordinary people, those whose stories are rarely preserved in texts or monumental architecture. These remains invite us to consider a quieter, yet equally powerful narrative of the past, one built on care, ritual, and remembrance. As such, cremation should not be seen as the end of the archaeological story, but its beginning. It is a vital archive of human experience, one that challenges us to reconsider what we value in reconstructing the past. In the ash and fragments of Colchester's cremated dead, all that remains is, in fact, all that truly matters.